Hi again, everybody. Today we're going to continue to refine our knowledge of harmony by adding in a very important function that we call predominant function. And along with this, we're going to learn about a concept called the phrase model. So let's start by learning a little bit about predominant function in general. So predominant, and we're going to use the abbreviation PD. Chords are chords that create anticipation for the arrival of the dominant. Therefore, they're going to act as connective tissue between tonic and dominant functions. Now, last lesson, we learned a bunch about tonic prolongation. Usually predominant is going to come in after this segment of tonic prolongation. It's going to come in a little bit towards the cadence point. So number 2 here, phrases are usually constructed according to what's called the phrase model, whereby the harmonic motion of tonic through predominant to dominant and tonic at the cadence. So at the cadence, you're either going to get dominant for a half cadence, or you're going to get dominant to tonic, which is an authentic cadence. And this is going to guide a phrase from its beginning to its cadence. Let's take a look here at this example for an instance of a phrase model. Here we have a substantial portion of tonic prolongation, so you'll notice the T written at the bottom there, kind of extending all the way through the first, a little bit past into the fourth measure basically. Then you get a brief predominant and dominant chord at the very ending of this. Now, as we're going to find out, especially in the classical era, the most common predominant chord is actually the 2/6. Anyhow, let me play you this example. So it's that kind of predominant to dominant sound that we're talking about here today. So it's actually a very, very limited topic. So number 3, what are the chords that we tend to find and why? What makes predominant chords? This is very important because we're going to add more of these later on when we're talking about chromatic chords. So the best predominant chords are those that will promote stepwise voice leading into notes of the dominant triad. Therefore, chords with scale degree 4 and 6 are the preferred ones, as those scale degrees can move by contrary motion into 5. So here's 1, 4, and 6, they can move by contrary motion into scale degree 5. All right. Now, number 4, in the classical style, the most common predominant chords are 2/6, that's kind of the big one, and 4, used a little bit less common. You'll notice both of those have scale degree 4 in the bass. We'll look at those in a little bit. Now, in addition, though, there's several other ones that can be used too. Basically, other things that are built on the 2 chord or the 4 chord. So in major keys, you also might see a root position 2. 4/6 can be used. And also the root position 2/7 and the first inversion 2/6/5. Now, that doesn't mean that you can never encounter anything else. We will see a 2/4/2 a little later in this lesson, but in terms of predominant function, these are the ones you tend to see. Now, minor keys, same ones. Only thing is you do not get root position 2 in minor keys. So there's no root position 2 in a minor key. You'll only see that in first inversion. So 2/6, that can happen in minor. That'll be 2 diminished 6. But you'll never see a root position 2 diminished chord. That's because in a classical style, they don't like to highlight the tritone in the bass like that. All right, let's get into some of the voice leading details. And let's start with those chords that have scale degree 4 in the bass. These are by far the most common ones you're going to encounter. And it's going to be the root position 4 chord, the 2/6 chord, or if you want to add a 7th, you can get the 2/6/5. Now, that's not saying that you never ever get like a 4/7 as well. I'm just going to focus on the most common ones though. All right, so for number 1 here, we're looking at 4/5 and 2/6/5. What do you do there? If you look at these two, you'll notice how similar they are in the way I voice led them. Number 1, the first preference is to double the bass for both of these chords. So double scale degree 4. Now, if 2/6 occurs in a major key, it's also acceptable to double the root. I'd recommend still doubling the bass though. In other words, you're really kind of focusing on this scale degree 4 in the bass. So this is going to be your kind of characteristic predominant to dominant where you have fa to sol happening in the bass. So then what you do is move the upper voices in contrary motion to the bass. So notice how for both of these two progressions, I took all 3 upper voices and I moved them in contrary motion to the bass. The bass goes up and then all the upper voices move down. And that gives you what you find here. You'll notice that if you go from 4 to 5, the most one common soprano line might be do ti. And then if you do 2/6 to 5, which is your most common one, you get a very characteristic re to ti motion. That's a very, definitely kind of commit that one to memory because that's going to be very important to look for. It's a big giveaway for sort of a predominant to dominant. Now then finally, if you do have the 2/6/5, this is number 3, and the third example right here, you do have a 7th, so make sure you resolve the 7th down. Other than that, you'll see that the voices also tend to kind of move down for this one. Only here you can actually do a re soprano. All right, so again, if it's the triads, double the bass, scale degree 4, and move the voices in contrary motion to the bass. Let me play you these 3 examples. So 4 to 5. Now 2/6 to 5. And then finally 2/6/5 to 5. Hear that 7th. The 2/6 to 5 is very common in Bach chorales, very common cadence. All right, now let's go into some of the other ones that you may encounter in the repertoire. They're not as commonly encountered, but they're good to know as well. So what I put here is I did a root position, 2/7 to 5. I also did the 4/6 to 5. This has, in other words, these are all going to have different basses. They're not going to have the fa to sol bass. If you do a root position 2 to 5, you're going to get a 4th or 5th in the bass, a leap between re and sol. If you do 4/6 to 5, you're going to get scale degree 6 in the bass, so you're going to get a descending step in the bass. And then finally, I'll go on to this last one later. This one's kind of an exceptional one, but these first 2 are still very much a predominant to dominance. All right, for a root position 2, you may double the root. Now, if it's 2/7 on the other hand, just kind of include all 4 notes, so you don't need to worry about resolving it. So for 2/7, make sure you resolve the 7th down. So here, this is the 2/2 diminished 7. The 7th is C, and it resolves down. But you'll notice, again, I'm doing this kind of contrary motion thing happening with the bass. Now, for 4/6 to 5, actually, let me play you the first one. So now we're in minor key. Now, my next one, the 4/6 to 5, this is what's often called the Phrygian cadence, because that is if you're in a minor key, it's called the Phrygian half cadence. That's because you have this half step in the bass between the A flat and the G or scale degree 6 and the 5. Anyhow, now unfortunately, this is a very tricky one to write. This is probably the most error prone progression that you tend to find in classical music, 4/6 to 5. My recommendation, if it goes to a root position 5, is to double the 5th of the 4/6 chord. So that would be here, the note C, scale degree 1. That's the best note to double. And then try to move the voices in contrary motion as much as you can. Be careful not to create parallel octaves. And there's various other things that can happen here. So, but anyhow, this is a very nice progression. If you look at it, the voice leading the kind of wedge-like progression between the upper and the lower voices. Let me play this for you. So I doubled the C. Oh, sorry. Let me do that again. It's kind of a good thing if you can to possibly put that fa to sol motion in the bass. That's another thing too you can do. Now, the third one is something completely different. I wanted to mention a use of the 2/4/2 chord. And I also wanted to use this to introduce the idea of an embedded phrase model. That is, every time you encounter a chord progression that looks like tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic, it's not always a cadence. Sometimes there's smaller versions of this that actually serve as tonic prolongations. And this is a good example of this right here. Let me play it for you first, and we'll talk about it. Sorry. Okay, here I've actually analyzed this as a tonic prolongation. This will remind you of what we learned in last lesson plan. If you kind of reduce this down, the bass is essentially do, do, ti, do. Remember how we learned that last time? Those sort of neighbor motions are basically creations of tonic prolongations. So the 2-4-2 chord just adds a little bit of harmonic motion into this tonic prolongation. Rarely, if ever, does the 2-4-2 actually act as the phrase predominant. It's very much a different sort of chord. So another very interesting progression you can get. Also, I wanted to emphasize this idea of an embedded phrase model, which you'll occasionally encounter. All right, now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and do a couple exercises. First one, let's do a little harmonic analysis. Just measures 1 to 8. And Roman numerals, and also do a second level analysis and try to show how the phrase model is laid out here. For the most part, just 1 chord per measure, except when you get to measure 7. So you can reduce some of the first several measures into just 1 chord. I've given you the chord in measure 4, a root position 4. We haven't talked about that yet. And also, go ahead and just circle these 2 notes as non-chord tones for now. We'll talk about that in the next lesson. All right, so let me play you this example, and I want you to do a harmonic analysis with also do the second level analysis with your T, P, D, and D. Sorry. Okay, go ahead and pause the video and work on this. Then I'll show you my answer. All right, here is my answer. Now notice we have a very long span of tonic prolongation here. First, we go from 1 to 5, 6, 5 to 1, and we get that neighbor note in the bass. We get do, ti, measure 2 to do. So that's what we talked about last time. Then we get the 4 chord. This is a different use of the 4 chord here. It's not the predominant. We'll talk about this in a later lesson. But then we go 1, 6, then we do an incomplete neighbor, 5, 6, 5, and then back to 1. So all of that is tonic prolongation. If you follow the melody, it also does some neighbor note motions. You get me, fa. I'm just playing the first note of each measure. Me, fa, me, re, sol, fa, me. So kind of neighbor notes and passing tones. Anyhow, after all that, we get just 1 single predominant chord, the 2-6 at the very ending, and then we get the 5 chord. And this is actually extremely common to prolong the tonic for that long. In subsequent lessons, we'll find out that we can also prolong the predominant and especially the dominant, but tonic prolongation is sort of your most common situation. Okay, now let's take a look at the next exercise. Here we're going to do a little part writing. And you're going to actually create the progression. Imagine we're in the key of C major, and I've given you, so here's our key, and I've given you this melody. Okay, And what I want you to do is add a bass line. That's going to give us a nice counterpoint with the outer voice. Roman numerals. And also I want you to complete the progression. I only want you to use the chords we've talked about so far. All right, so this is where you're going to apply all that you've learned. And what I want you to think about in addition, well, one thing you need to look at is think about the scale degrees in the soprano and which chords in general these would fit with. But I also really want you to think about the phrase model, tonic, predominant, dominant, and then possibly tonic if it's an authentic cadence. Like how long can you do tonic prolongation? What soprano note gives you the predominant, and so on and so forth. Okay, so actually let me give you a little idea of what I would be looking at here. If I'm looking at this from a tonic prolongation standpoint, I'd see at the beginning, mi, fa, mi, re, do. That seems like all a good spot for tonic prolongation. So think about some inversions of one you can use that would produce nice counterpoint with the bass. So basically all the way from measure 1 to the beginning of measure 2, that looks to me like tonic prolongation. Then I see re, ti. Now that to me looks like some sort of predominant to dominant half cadence at the very ending, right? So I'm looking for these kind of telltale scale degrees, and also I'm looking at where they're occurring in the phrase to decide what chords to use. Then I can decide which inversions are going to produce nice lines. So you all take a moment and you can try this out on your own. Now we're all going to come up with different solutions, so feel free to email me your solution before I show you mine. But go ahead and pause the video now and try this out. Then I'll show you what I came up with. Okay, here's my solution. If you look at what I did, you'll see that I tried to create in terms of the choice of inversions. Remember, last lesson we learned that if we're going to do tonic prolongation, at least what we've learned so far, is we're mostly going to be using inversions of 5 and 7, right? And also the 1/6 chord can be used. So what I did here is I mostly created contrary motion counterpoint with the soprano. So since the soprano at the beginning goes mi, fa, mi, I went do, ti, do, and did that neighbor note prolongation. Then I saw mi, re, do in the soprano, and I said, well, let's do a voice exchange. And I did do, re, mi, and I used the 7 diminished 6 as a passing chord. All right. Other than that, I just resolved my tendency tones. So fa goes down, ti goes up. That's what the arrows are showing. When you're checking your answers, by the way, be very careful. That's what you always need to do first, is resolve your tendency tones. Then at the ending, I just added in a 2/6 to 5. Notice that I doubled the bass of the 2/6, and that I then resolved. Whoops, I made a voice leading error, by the way. Sorry, I had changed things around a little bit. This note in the alto should be a D right there. Should have moved all that in contrary motion to the bass, because with this way, it actually created parallel octaves. So that's just because I erased something from before and forgot to change this. So yeah, this should be a D in the alto voice. Anyhow, feel free to send me your answers before you work on your homework.